If there's something about a set of images that you like in the way that they're lit, there's a couple different ways you can look at those images and figure out what you need to do to replicate it on set. This test is slightly crude, it's not going to be exact, and there's a couple things you have to do before you can actually jump into DaVinci Resolve and start looking at these reference images. What we're going to be doing is looking at a couple reference images and using false color to figure out contrast ratios and general light levels. But it's important to note that you should run these tests on your camera to see where false color values lie at a certain number of stops above or below middle gray. To do this, you could use a middle gray card and then expose properly at a given f-stop, say f4, and then you can go one stop under f4, you can go to 2.8, and then see what value is being represented on the middle gray patch in your false color. Just jot down each of these colors as you go, f4, 2.8, 2, 1.4, figure out what color is represented at a number of stops above or below middle gray. Like I said, false color isn't the best for this, but it's something that's built in natively with DaVinci Resolve. It's also important to note that we're looking at images post-grade. So it's also a little iffy on if the cinematographer exposed these images in the same way that the final image is displayed. But like I said, as much work as you can do with the reference images and get as technical with them as possible, the more it's going to help you out down the line. So with that being said, let's jump into some of these images from Prisoner of Azkaban and see what we like about them. And first, let's establish our base point, what I discovered in these tests. Middle gray in the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is represented as green on its false color. Salmon color is about one stop above middle gray. From 2 stops to 4 stops above middle gray, it's all light gray. You can see a slight variation, but it's all generally light gray. At plus 5 stops, you're getting 95% white clipping. So you probably have 5.5 stops above middle gray, depending on your ISO. And then if we're going down, 1 stop below middle gray is dark gray. 2 stops below middle gray is dark gray. 3 stops below middle gray is very dark gray. You can see a difference there. 4 stops below middle gray is dark blue. 5 stops below is purple. Initial impressions is that the shot is very dark. It's moody. There's a lot of blacks in the image. It's really helping pop him out of the frame, even against kind of the gray background that he's on. If we were to flick on false color, we can see that you don't need to throw a bunch of light if you're trying to get somebody's skin to pop. It's better to have them sit against a very dark background. In general, we can see the image is going from middle gray or just around it on the left side of the frame, all the way to the right side, getting progressively darker. We can assume that the key light is coming from frame left and that it's probably quite close to the subject. Because of the inverse square law, we can see that he is lit pretty well, and then just on the other side of his face, and especially as the background falls frame right, it gets progressively darker, so we can assume that the key light is close, or they have a lot of negative fill on frame right. So that's something we can discern. It looks like it's probably just one light. The brightest part of the image is the left side of his cheek. That's also something to take note of. The very brightest part of your image should be the subject. That goes without saying, but also something to reinforce, and is reinforced through this false color representation. So if we look at the brightest part of the image, it's sitting at about 1 stop above middle gray, and then most of the image around him is either dark blue or purple. So the totality of this image, the contrast of this entire image, is about 6 stops. So if you're looking at key to fill ratios across the face, you have a stop above middle gray, and then 4 to 5 stops below middle gray on the fill side. So you jot down that ratio, you get there on set, you communicate with the gaffer, you pull out the light meter, boom, it's done. And that's the importance of studying these reference images. This is what you're trying to represent, and it's helpful to be as technical as possible when communicating with a larger crew. What I like about this image is how soft the shadows are. You can see that the light is slightly above, but also just the subject to background ratio. He really pops. So this is almost the same as the first image in regards to one side of the image basically falling into black, and then the other side of the image, you start to see those values be pushed up toward middle gray, a little bit past. So it's the same thing with this image. You have a key coming frame right, The position of the light is probably a little bit higher than his eye height, pointed down slightly. You can see that shadow on his glasses, the way that it's kind of coming down onto his face like that. So you have somewhat an idea of how close the key light is, and then the directionality of it. It's very soft. And then if we jump into false color, Harry is white, so it makes sense that his skin is sitting just a stop above middle gray. It is the brightest part in the image, except for the background window separating his left side of the shoulder, frame right, from the background from just sinking in. And what you can also see is that it is the exact same contrast ratio across the face as we saw in that first image. It is 1 stop above middle gray, and then about 5 stops below middle gray. The way that you create this even light across their face from all the way frame right, all the way up to about a little bit past the middle where Neville and Professor Lupin are standing. The way to create that consistency is to put your key light really far back. If it's really close to frame right, you're gonna see that the kid all the way to the right is very bright, and then all the way up to Lupin is gonna be dark, because light drop off is substantial when the light is closer to the subject. Whereas if you were to take that key light, move it really far back, you're gonna have the same amount of light, although a bit dimmer. You're gonna have the same amount of light across, let's say, a 10-foot radius. Not assuming that's exactly what they did, they could have had multiple lights. But if you're trying to create that consistency across a really far frame, you want to put that light really far back, which means you're just going to have stronger, brighter lights. So that's going to be everything for today. I hope there's something from this video you could take away when you're going to prepare for a shoot, or say you just have an interview and you have a series of reference images and you want to mimic the quality of light, the ratios, the background to foreground aesthetic. There's something you can do with false color. Say you run these tests, you'll have a crude idea of the ratios you like, the ratios that have been approved by the team, and you can start to be informed about position of the key, the height of the key, and then the power of the key compared to the background. Hopefully this helps some people in their pre-production stages begin to get as technical as possible as they transition into the production stages. So once again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.